So I predict in the next 10 years, it is quite possible that we will have a major national Islamist political party in the United States. Not because there are a lot of radical Muslims in the United States, because there's not, but because there's so much money behind this. And either what's going to happen is they're either going to take over the Democratic Party, or if they can't take over the Democratic Party, eventually they will split off and they will have their own national party. This is called the weapon of mass migration. And this is not theory or conspiracies. We have already seen this happen in multiple countries around the world, where an adversarial power will put a bunch of people on the move to destabilize or distract a country. Deportations are a massively important part of it, because deportations are a significant form of deterrence. You know, there are countries in Asia, in the Middle East, and Africa where you can go to a travel agent and book your illegal entry in the United States. You are less safe today for the U.S. government to protect you from a 9/11 attack than you were on 9/11. That's the scale of the problem that we have. Everything we did post 9/11 to prevent 9/11, in the last 4 years, we have dismantled, distracted, diverted, or marginalized.
Welcome to the Breakaway with David and Fabian. Today we have a very special guest. We have Jim Carafano here of the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for being on. I know you just got off a very long flight.
I did. It was like 17 hours. Which, when we did it the old-fashioned way, we were going from Cape Town to Washington, D.C., and, you know, in the age of GPS, you're just supposed to, like, fly from point to point, right? But apparently they didn't actually trust that, so they actually flew along the coast. So we did like Vasco da Gama, you know, we kind of went up the coast of Africa to Europe and then stormed across the Atlantic and got here. Because we had to get here for the podcast. That was just non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
That's how important the podcast is.
Absolutely, yeah.
You heard it here first.
So you're in Cape Town, get here. You know, like that, and then we do that.
I'm just a little worried. It almost feels like the pilots might have been DEI hires, but
you know, I don't know.
Maybe the navigation system.
They seem terribly diverse, actually, but we won't name the airline, but it was a United flight.
So Jim, for the people that may have not heard of you before, can you just give us a brief summary of who
I can't
you
imagine that there's anybody out there. So I've been at Heritage Foundation a really long time. I was in the Army for a super long time before that, and I came to Heritage. I've always worked on national security and foreign policy stuff. I oversaw the team, about 50 analysts working on everything to do. Whereas my mom, who would I call my mom when she was still alive, and the first thing she would say is, "Don't tell me what you did today," right? Because it's all bad, the bad stuff, right? So I did that. You know, it's been really interesting because through Republican and Democratic administrations, Republican administrations that didn't like us all that much, Democratic administrations that didn't talk to us all that much, working really, really super closely with the Trump administration, and then surviving the last 4 years of the desert. And the last couple of years, what I've been doing is, because we brought in a new person to be the vice president for the foreign policy and national security team. So what I've been working on is kind of the other half of the job. This is really networking and outreach. And we were talking before the podcast started about how the global conservative movement has evolved in the last 10 years. So I don't say I kind of neglected that part of the job, because the demand signal wasn't there. But we've had this incredible movement, and I don't know what to call things anymore, because everywhere you go, people like different names. Like, I'm a conservative, I'm a populist, I'm a neocon, I'm a freecon, I'm a classical Republican, I'm a classical liberal, right? So I don't care, because I'm not up for the names, but it's interesting that, and particularly in particular parts of the world. So definitely in the United States and Canada. In really all over Europe now. I used to say in significant parts of Europe, but there's almost not a country in Europe where the resurgence of conservative isn't there. All across Latin America. Matter of fact, the rebounding of the conservative movement in Latin America in the last couple of years is just absolutely stunning. And Africa, where you don't think of kind of the division of Africa into traditional kind of, in the West, kind of Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative divides. But there are a lot of issues that everyday Africans, and it doesn't matter if you're talking in in North Africa and places like Morocco, or if you're in South Africa or in West Africa, have in common. And so one of the interesting things as I've gone around and had all these conversations is the number of issues that always come up. And there's kind of a basket of 6. I bet you guys would guess them all, actually. But energy and environment, absolutely. Either you want, or you're really tired of people telling you that you can't produce energy and make money for your country and your people, or you're really, really sick of the idea that you have to live in basically energy poverty and never catch up with the rest of the world. So, and it's like we came out of the closet, right? You're from California, right? Yeah. You totally get this, right? Oh, yeah. I used to hang a lot with Gary Sinise, who like, we can't tell people we're actually conservative, right? The whole idea we can't really discuss this. But 5 years ago, even conservatives who knew that net zero and all this stuff was stupid and ridiculous, they were afraid to actually discuss it in public. And that's changed. So that's a huge set of issues because it encompasses the world, because everybody is either a producer or a consumer or both. All the woke stuff. And woke is a big umbrella because woke, it means different things to different people. So parts of Latin America and Europe you go to, they don't want to talk about the life issue. For them, it's kind of settled. Right. But in that space, whether it's DEI, ESG, the gender stuff, family issues, which are huge, people want to take, and they're really, really tired of seeing their way of life destroyed and common sense destroyed by us. So that's a big set of issues. Immigration and border, you would be shocked at how many countries have deep, deep concerns on this issue and are just... And I would be the first guy to say, that put a tin hat on, right? But there is a globalist agenda. There is a desire to destroy the nation state, and there is a desire to have a global right to migrate and use that as a mechanism for driving global governance. That's a real thing. If people get that, so that's a big issue. Free speech and lawfare, just in the last couple of years, the number of places where you go where people find their freedom of expression suppressed for political reasons or being attacked by the legal system. And in many of these places under the names of protecting democracy, right? This is a massive, massive issue. China is a big issue. Not everybody, we don't all agree on China, but we all agree that China is a big problem we have to think about. And the other one, which has also kind of exploded in the last couple of years, is anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. This global intifada, this is a big problem. And people realize it's not just a problem about Israel and about Jews. It is another mechanism for destroying the fabric of normal society. And so that's a big issue of concern. So to be able to go around the world and basically sit in a room with anybody who is from the center right to the right and be able to have a responsible adult conversation and a serious one, that's something we couldn't do 5-10 years ago. And this is a movement on the march.
Yeah. Why don't we actually start with it, talking about a little bit about all the mixes of things that you spoke about. Let's start with immigration specifically. With your expertise being in national security, the open border that we've had in the last few years, especially under the previous administration, it's estimated 11 million illegal immigrants have poured into the country. Is that an actual threat to the United States, or is it just narratives that the right likes to build up that, this is an actual national security threat? And
just to prove that I'm just not a guy that's filling in here, I actually started here on that portfolio. Actually, 20 years ago, when we talked about the Big Ten of the conservative movement, bringing people together, the way we did that is there were issues that we didn't talk about. And the reason for that is we had our different tribes, and the tribes didn't all agree on all these issues. So things like abortion, couldn't talk about that because everybody agreed on that, or gender issues, or immigration. Immigration was the third rail of American politics 20 years ago. Nobody wanted to talk about it. So, of course, they gave me that portfolio because it's the way evil minds work. I actually wrote the textbook on Homeland Security. I was an advisor to 3 secretaries on the Homeland Security Advisory Committee. I ran the transition team for Trump for Homeland Security. I've been to the border more times than I can count. So Tom Homan, has been a buddy and a colleague like forever. I think he's going to get a job.
I think so.
So
I heard there's a border czar.
the easiest way to explain this is really, really simple. I mean, and I'm not saying we did everything right after 9/11, but what I will tell you is this: is everything we did post 9/11 to prevent 9/11. In the last 4 years, we have dismantled, distracted, diverted, or marginalized. You are less safe today for the U.S. government to protect you from a 9/11 attack than you were on 9/11. That's the scale of the problem that we have.
And why is that? What exactly happened that we're less safe now?
Well, we've opened up all the vectors. And the one thing you never want to give terrorists, is it's means and motive and opportunity. Giving them opportunity is a big mistake, right? We talk about we've got to get it right 100 times. Terrorists only have to get it right once. And so the one thing you want to do is, because there's still let's be honest, there are a limited number of terrorists in the world. I mean, terrorists are a tiny subset of any population that you could name, any ethnic, racial, national. They're a tiny percentage of anything except other terrorists. Maybe in Gaza, they're in the majority. So what we did on 9/11 was we started making terrorist travel more difficult, right? So it wasn't easy to get here, and then so we kind of took that off the table. When you have an open border, essentially you've created an infinite number of ways for terrorists to do things, and that's a really, really bad idea because terrorists like predictability. Why do people like car bombs? Because once you figure out how to do a car bomb, it's a very, very, very dependable. Why do they do IEDs? Why do they do suicide bombers? Once they get a tactic down, they go back to those tactics again and again and again, and they only move on when those tactics fail. It's like they tried a car bomb on the Twin Towers, right? They only came back later with the airplanes because that was not the traditional ways weren't going to work. So they had to innovate new words. And even that was not a new innovation. It was an idea that had actually been played with for years. So what we do by having these open borders is it's like we give them the card of deck, the whole deck of cards. We're playing poker. You get the whole deck of cards. You get to have all your card, the whole deck face up is yours, and then you get to decide which cards you want and which cards I get. That's why it's so dangerous.
Wow. I would say that if I was somebody that wanted to impact the United States in such a way, I would do it exactly like this. Create a rush of individuals that come up through the southern border, perhaps have an administration that is very relaxed in enforcing those laws to allow terrorists to actually enter the United States. That way it almost feels like intentional. And I always ask Fabian this, seems like it's intentional rather than it just being pure negligence.
Well, look, I mean, if you actually want to do a serious terror attack and bring in people from abroad, right, you want to make sure you can get them here. In the old days, you would come in through the legal way, even though there were obstacles, because you knew the obstacles and you knew the obstacles you faced. Now it's like, not only can you just walk across the border, but literally they will take you into any city in America you want to go to. Yeah. It is completely nuts and insane.
And it's not happening just here. It's happening all over the world. I mean, we see things in Ireland and all over Europe. It seems like this is a coordinated attack on Western civilizations by globalist entities, et cetera. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, terrorism is a problem for a couple of reasons. I just wrote an article about this in Fox News. One, of course, is the intense vulnerabilities. So we've created enormous opportunities. The second one is this global intifada, because the global intifada is inspiring. You don't necessarily have to push assets. You have to push ideas and networks, and you can do that without actually moving people. This got us the Boston bomber. There's no difference between what we saw with the Boston bomber and what we just saw recently in New Orleans. China, Russia, and Iran are America's implacable enemies. It's not going to change. It's not going to change for the simple reason that their foreign policies are literally built on the premise that they can only advance their interests if they can diminish the power and interest of the United States. Yeah. We have always seen state sponsorship of terrorism, but when they have less hard power to play with, which Iran does now because they got beat up pretty bad, Russia's been diminished quite a bit by the Ukraine war. Chinese economy is not good. they're gonna shift more to sponsorship of state sponsorship, either direct or indirectly supporting terrorists. So the threat is way both from what's pushing them and what's going against them. The other thing, I want to go back to something you guys mentioned, because it's something that we still don't talk about enough, which is a little different than, sneaking terrorists across the border in a flood of illegal immigrants. And this is called the weapon of mass migration. And this is not theory or conspiracies or, something made up for a Tom Clancy novel. We have already seen this happen in multiple countries around the world, where an adversarial power will put a bunch of people on the move to destabilize or distract a country. So we've seen it, for example, with the Russians literally collecting up people in the Middle East and then just throwing them across the border and saying, you guys can't come back. From Belarus, trying to push them into Poland and those countries. We saw it, for example, with the Syrian refugees used as a threat. We've seen this with countries in North Africa as a negotiating tool. Give us what we want, or we'll open up, let more illegal aliens come. We have so opened ourselves up for this. I mean, what is to keep the Chinese or Russians from just taking $50 million and going to somebody and saying, send 1 million people across the border today? And what day would you pick? Well, the same day that, maybe China wants to attack Taiwan, or that's something, right? So this is a real serious thing. And so what you have on the one hand is people like George Soros, and this is a real thing. This idea we have to create a global right to migrate. What you are doing is, one is you're putting in the hands of adversarial powers another weapon to attack democracies. Because these things are not free. You are every one of these, when you trigger these things, massive human rights abuses, suffering. It's horrible. When you put people on the move, you create tragedy. And then you have things like they can take diseases with them. They can create a massive economic disruption. And if you time that with geopolitical threats, you have a real problem. So the number one thing we have to do, remember we used to talk about weapons of mass destruction, take those off the table.
Yep.
As long as we can make sure Al-Qaeda doesn't have a nuclear missile, we can work down from there. It's the same way. The first thing we have to do in border and immigration policy is take weapons of mass migration off the table and then work our way down to all the other threats.
And how would you do that? Previously, in the first administration, we've seen Remain in Mexico, which, right, that kind of did a little bit, but then zero tolerance, that was a true deterrence mechanism to stop so many, migrants from all over the world coming up to the southern border. Is that a solution? Is that just a short-term solution? What is the permanent solution?
Well, a shocking thing, of course, in terms of just securing our southern border it is so unusual in public policy to actually have seen contrasting policies but put into practice, and you can make a pick. It's like driving a Ford Chevy, a Chevy for a year, and then driving a Mercedes, and then you decide which one you want. So we actually saw in the Trump administration the policies that significantly deal with the threat and reduce the risk. And so it's just going back to them. So obviously border security is a huge part of that. Obviously going after the human trafficking networks that support that's a huge part of that. But deportations are a massively important part of it, because deportations are a significant form of deterrence. People pay between 5, 10, there are countries in Asia, in the Middle East, and Africa where you can go to a travel agent and book your illegal entry in the United States.
Wow.
Transportation, handling, everything. So costs vary. Probably with Biden's inflation, it made it a little more difficult. But and a lot of these places, they said, we'll give you multiple tries. If we try to take you across and it doesn't work, you get 2 more tries or whatever. But if you're putting $5,000-$10,000 on the table, you want a reasonable expectation that you're going to get in. And so as soon as people start knowing that people can't get in and people are getting thrown out, it's going to have a big deterrent effect. the other thing, and people don't talk about this, but it's true, is a lot of people are going to self-deport. You probably heard these stories about people who are here on asylum status who then go on vacation to their home country to see that. Yeah, really? So you're so afraid for your life that you're going to go home for Christmas? People are going to self-deport because it's kind of, dude, it's your call, right? You can. Maybe you got a job, maybe you got employees, maybe your kids are in school, I don't know, whatever. But you can live your life and sit around, and then one day when ICE comes to get you, they're going to take you. You're never going to see your family again, right? And you're never going to get out of detention, and then, or you can just kind of leave on your own terms, right? Settle your affairs, get everything straight, leave on your own terms, try to come back legally. So we actually saw a significant rise in self-deportation under Trump. I predict we'll probably see that again. But the answer is, people say, well, we're going to deport all the criminal aliens. Well, first of all, they're all criminal aliens because they all entered illegally. But you have to go beyond the rapists and the murderers. I mean, you got to start deporting people who came here to get a job and they're here illegally. Because if you don't do that, you're not sending a message to the world that that's not how we're going to do business.
Earlier, you spoke about George Soros and the fact that he doesn't like national borders. He wants just freely moving between any country. And then Biden proceeds to give him the Medal of Freedom, which I think was an incredibly despicable act. And now his son is taking pictures with Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, etc. What is happening there?
Look, when before the election, they asked us to write a memo, and they said, what's going to change if Trump wins? What's going to change if Biden wins? And the Biden memo that I wrote on immigration and border security, it must have been like, I was reading their brain or something, because they did exactly that. I said, they're going to come in and they're going to do 100% reversal of Trump's policies. Things that even Obama didn't do. Things that even Biden, people forget, Biden never really, there was one debate where he talked about immigration and border security, and where he was kind of honest about that. But this is not something they talked about. So they basically came in and nobody was prepared for the tsunami that they did. And then people can say, why are they doing this? And of course, the common theory was, they want to import illegal immigrants, and then they'll get them amnesty, and then they'll all vote Democrat, and they'll have permanent majorities forever. But I think it's deeper than that. I think that the reality is it is very difficult to divide the Soros agenda, the open society agenda, the extreme socialist, Marxist, global agenda of elites from the Democratic Party and democratic governance. And the party, I mean, these are their mega donors. These are the people that are directing them. These are the people that know where all the bodies are buried. These are the people that put them in power. And they saw this as their golden opportunity. Here Biden, they had the perfect patsy to do this. And this was their, this was their moment, like Hitler invading France. It's like, this is the moment to roll the dice. And that's what they did. So I believe it's not really about elections, or this is about transforming global governance.
And it's interesting because it seems like all the, as you said, Iran, China, and Russia are all just enemies of the U.S. because they want different things. It seems like they're supporting, especially China, some of these narratives pushing the same kind of things that George Soros wants, whether he wants from a Marxist way or a Hegelian way. Right. But they kind of all align on these issues, and then we're over here trying to fight not only George Soros but all these countries.
This is like the enemy of my enemy thing. This is like so true. Like this, like people like said, well, Putin hates Soros, and Putin hates Jews, right? So we should like Soros because Putin hates him and he's a Jew. And I go, no, it doesn't actually work that way, because the reality is there are so many ways in which their agendas align. And the thing is, they all think they're going to be the big winner in the end. Mm. So whether you are the World Economic Forum and your global vision, or you're Russia, China, and Iran, or you're the Islamists, right? You all think in the end, I'm going to be the guy that's going to win out. And so it's okay to make common cause and hammer the thing. So yes, it is true that the Chinese push a lot of these same things because It's congruent with their Marxist doctrine, with socialism, and it's congruent with their agenda of destabilizing the United States. George Soros thinks he's transforming the world into a perfect socialist paradise. China, Russia, and Iran think they're undermining American power and influence. The Islamists think they're cracking the Western disorder for the new caliphate. And the reality is they all believe they're achieving this at the same time. And I know this sounds weird, but I don't know if you saw this movie that came out this year. I love movies, by the way. I don't care if they come from Hollywood. This movie called The Order wasn't out a big long time. It was Michael Fassbender, I think, but he plays an FBI guy. He's tracking down these white supremacists in the 1980s. It's based on a book called The Order. And in the book, which is based on exhaustive records from the prosecutions and everything, these are white supremacists who were going to save part of America. We're going to peel off Idaho, and it's going to be a white bastion, and everything is going to be fine. But they were actively out trying to connect with Islamist terrorists, right? Because they're like, we hate Jews, they hate Jews, right?
Shared
so
alliance.
like they have but that was enough. So they actively were trying to get a meeting with the Syrian embassy and the Iranians so they could maybe get some funding and coordinate attacking Jews for them, right? Wow. So yeah, it's like, it's like when you're in the NFL, right? You hate the Cowboys and you hate the Redskins because you're a Giant, so you hate them both, right? Yeah. But they also want to defeat each other. So this is a rough, there's a lot of people, and you know why? 87% of this is us. George Kennedy wrote The Long Telegram. This was when he was serving in the embassy in Moscow after World War II, and the Russians were being very unhelpful, and we were like, what's going on here? They were our allies. Why are they turning against us? And he was the first guy to really say, look, you don't understand. These guys are in an existential battle for the future of the world. And so he writes this long telegram about how to defeat them. But what's the most important part is the last section, which nobody reads, which basically says, look, we're going to win. We have everything on our side. We're stronger. We're freer. We've got a better economy. God's with us. He goes, the only way we can lose this fight is if in the prosecution of this thing, we become the enemy, right? In other words, we adopt their methods and tactics. We've adopted so many self-defeating behaviors in the last 4 years that are pathological, but they're essentially emulating what the communists and socialists want us to do. They undermine our economy. They undermine our security. They undermine their social fabric. We adopted these self-defeating behaviors. We put all these guys back in the game. It's our fault. I mean, how many examples? I mean, this is the great thing about having Trump be president and then leave and then come back is nobody invaded Ukraine when Trump was president. Nope. ISIS died when Trump was president. Mm-hmm. Nobody was attacking Israel when Trump was president. You cannot make an argument that somehow it's all Trump's fault, right? Because it was the opposite. When we were strong and resilient in our own defense, not only was America safer, but the world was safer. And for the very simple reasons we stopped doing very stupid and self-defeating things. This is the definition of what unites global conservatives. The issue that we started with is, at root of what it all is people seeing for themselves in their life that things aren't working. And wanting people running the government who actually are going to change that. This is, populism is a dirty word, or with many, it's still a dirty word, because we often use populism and we evoke it in the context of the 19th and 20th century, where a populist was people are frustrated and angry, so you're a good-looking guy. So the great thing about radio is you don't know which one I'm talking about. So they're both going, I agree with him.
Everybody knows that he picked Fabian for a reason.
No, but we're going to vote for you, and you, this cool, good-looking person, is going to fix all our problems. That was the idea of populism. We love Mussolini because he said he's going to fix everything. Great, awesome. We love Hitler. He's going to fix everything. That is not modern populism. People do not vote for Donald Trump because they're enamored with his tweeting and his hair. They vote for Donald Trump because they go, this guy is going to fix the problems that I see in the way I think they should be fixed. And what we have seen is where we have seen conservative governments or center-right governments, and the UK is a good example, and Poland's an example, fail is it can't just be Coke and Pepsi, dude, right? If you get elected, you have to be different, right? You have to actually act on the issues. And if you don't, voters are going to say, well, you're no better than the other Yahoo. This is when you look at who are the emerging, powerful, colorful, empowering, enabling, inspiring leaders in the world today. People like Milei in Argentina, Meloni in Italy, Modi in India. I wish I could get Trump to change his name to Mump, because then they would all there would be alliteration there. But these leaders they're not populists in the sense that they're big charismatic figures, although many of them are, but that their focus is on how do I deliver for people and solve the people's problems? How do I actually create human flourishing in your communities? And so it's very interesting to see leaders like this that are kind of really leading kind of the global charge. I tell people that in 10 years, we're going to look back at Milei, Meloni, Musk, Trump, Modi, and we're going to talk about them in the same terms that we talked about Thatcher, Pope John Paul, Ronald Reagan. It's this coalition of leaders who understood what the value of freedom and what it really delivered, and what delivering good governance for your people really means, and led the transformation on that.
I think a lot of people actually migrated over to supporting these folks because these might be the only folks that truly understand the shared grievances that the populace has, whether in 16 it was with immigration. Right. We can say the same thing now with immigration and the economy. I kind of want to talk a little bit more about Israel, being that I'm from there, so I have a little bias about it, but I grew up around the same time that the second Intifada was happening. Right. We were on a public bus yesterday, and that was the first time I was on a bus since I was a little kid in Israel, because of the fear that we had from buses blowing up every other day, pizzerias and stuff like that. But never in my life I would have thought that I would see college kids, and not just college kids, but just people on the streets here in America cheering on for a global Intifada. Do you believe that that is the national security? And do you think that this happens because of American college universities just educating, I guess, demoralizing, radicalizing students into believing these movements?
Yeah, I have to say it's not just an American problem. So I was just in South Africa where, there's a significant Muslim population, which is not actually politically radical. And you walk around and there's these, free Palestine stuff all over the place. And like, well, where is this coming from? What's important to understand is this is not like the civil rights movement. This is not a bottoms-up movement of people in the street recognizing this is a social moral injustice and it needs to be addressed. This was an invented human rights movement, right? This is a global intifada with networks, with funding in the United States and other places that specifically, and they've been operationalizing for years, using many of the same tactics, and in some cases, many of the same networkers, other radical groups like Antifa and BLM. And they've built this infrastructure. And so the kids didn't come to this in of themselves. They were educated, they were indoctrinated into this. And it's scary, right? And because it kind of came out of nowhere and kind of smacked us on the side of the head. And it's in places that years ago you would have never thought of. So in the United States, because I work a lot on this issue, we actually have a thing at Heritage. We have it's a global task force for combating anti-Semitism. It's a coalition of conservative and Jewish groups that try to work together on this. And the way I explain it is, because if you read a lot of Heritage policies over the last 20 years, you won't see a ton of stuff on Israel and anti-Semitism. And I said, look, you have to understand, it's not because we used to be anti-Semitic, right? It's that conservatives in the policy space tend to focus on the things we disagree on. Mm-hmm. If we agree on it, we go, okay, we're not going to talk about that. What do we? Yeah. We're talking about the things we disagree. And the reality is these were not controversial issues in America 10 years ago. Israel was a completely bipartisan issue in the United States. Nobody thought, other than a couple of wackos and white supremacists and Islamists thought that anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism was a good idea. And now, and actually, this was before October 7th. We actually started on this project several years ago because I could see that for the first time in my political life in the United States, Israel and anti-Semitism were becoming political issues. That it mattered which party you were in. That there was a party that was against it, and then there was a party that either tolerated it or actually embraced it. And therefore it was important for us to take on. And it's actually been quite a bit of a struggle because a lot of people, they don't want to wake up to the reality of modern politics, which is, well, I don't want to, so for example, one of the things we went after as part of our anti-Semitic thing was DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, because one of our guys actually did research. He looked at the social media accounts of DEI employees across the United States. And the percentage of ones who had used anti-Semitic language in their social media was astronomical.
Wow.
And it's because DEI has been an instrument of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. And when we go to groups that fighting DEI is part of the anti-Semitism fight, traditional Jewish groups, we can't do that. The left loves DEI. We can't can't upset them. They may not invite us to a cocktail party or something. So it's been an interesting challenge. I got to look. It's important for two reasons. One is it's incredibly destructive to the social fabric of the United States to demonize any segment of the population just on who they are. It's so destructive. But Israel is an absolutely vital strategic partner of the United States, and so for those two reasons, this is a real U.S. interest. So we're quite lucky to actually have a Trump administration that I think will take all of these issues. And you know what? I think these guys will crumble. I think this stuff will crumble in universities within a few years.
It's interesting that obviously the left has taken this up as their new hill to die on, but it's even seeped into the conservative movement with people like Candace Owens spending literally 3 months just attacking Jewish people, and now other influencers doing the same thing. How do we break that? What's is it Qatari money coming in, filtering in? Is it?
Everybody has their anti-Semitics. I don't think there's a political party or segment that doesn't have somebody that doesn't have a dark part of their soul. But there's a difference, I think, between that and between being a systemic party or policies. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Democratic Party, this has become mainstream Democratic politics, and so I see those as very separate problems. My thing is look. You want to be an anti-Semitic on the right, have a nice day, because you know what? You're going to lose a lot of friends really quickly.
Yeah.
I don't worry about that. But the systemic networking stuff, the infrastructure things, that stuff I think we have to take on and destroy. So this is, and again, I'm not political. I'm not even a Republican. I don't belong to a political party. And I'm a dog in this fight. We have two political parties, one that either tolerate or embraces anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist policies, and one that will simply not stand for it. That's the reality, all right? What's going to happen, and actually this goes back to your point before we were talking about people coming over to Republicans. Trump borrowed these voters, right? There's not 77 million hardcore Josh Rogan listeners out there. I got to tell you, I'm sure Josh Rogan wishes there were. I'm sure he's very envious about your podcast. He goes, "Oh man, I wish I had those guys' numbers." But the reality is Trump borrowed a lot of voters because they didn't like immigration policy, they didn't like inflation, they didn't like the debt stuff, they didn't like the woke stuff. The next 4 years are crucial because if they deliver on those issues, the next 4 years, then the odds are those people will come over, and we will move from a country which was tugging back and forth for now almost 20 years between center right and center left. We will become a solidly center right country. And then the question goes, what happens to the Democratic Party? Does it reform and move to the new center, which means on the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism stuff, they've got to marginalize all that stuff? Or do they become a failed third party? So I predict in the next 10 years, it is quite possible that we will have a major national Islamist political party in the United States.
Wow.
Not because there are a lot of radical Muslims in the United States, because there's not, but because there's so much money behind this. And either what's going to happen is they're either going to take over the Democratic Party, or if they can't take over the Democratic Party, eventually they will split off and they will have their own national party.
That's actually really scary to think about. So to kind of go off what Fabian was talking about, I've seen a lot of conservative personalities since October 7th just shift over to take over on this narrative that Israel is bad for America. Look at all these endless wars that we're fighting for Israel, all of this stuff, whatever narrative that they can come up with. How dangerous is that to the overall Republican Party, though? And these are prominent figures in the conservative movement, like Fabian said, Candace Owens. I would add Tucker Carlson in there, and maybe we can get into foreign policy like that, shifting conservatives towards liking an isolationist position.
Yeah. I get asked this question all the time.
Yeah.
My answer is not much.
Okay.
First of all, we've always had an isolationist kind of
subgroup.
In the and honestly, we've had that in the Democratic Party as well. It's actually not true that it's just been Republicans. And I've only been doing this stuff for 50 years, so what do I know? But I don't think that segment of conservatives is any larger than it ever was. And this was not a foreign policy election. Foreign policy was not a top 20 issue in this election. Typically what you have on domestic foreign policy and foreign policy are opposite. On domestic policy, because people feel this stuff in their everyday life, is you like Obamacare, I like Obamacare, I like you, right? Mm-hmm. On foreign policy, it's exactly the opposite, right? We're not all experts on foreign policy. We just want a president that's going to do the right thing and take care of us and make us safe. So I like you. Whatever you say is the policy, I'm cool with that, right? I would say 90% of conservatives voted for Donald Trump, not because they have a particular foreign policy in mind. They want him to be isolationist. I mean, first of all, who doesn't want to end endless wars, right?
Yeah.
Who really wants to be a neocon? They just want him to do the right thing. And they will, I would say, trust Trump. Even the people that don't like Israel or want to pull out of Ukraine, in the end, I don't think they're going to be really very demonstrative either, because on 99% of the other issues, they want Trump to be successful. So it's very unlikely that they're going to try to destroy Trump on one issue when they win on the other 99. And we've actually seen this in the past, right? Who's the really skinny one?
Democratic?
No, Republican.
For like running for president?
No, the columnist. I'm showing my age.
Need some more cues.
Can't remember. Doesn't matter. But we've seen this before, where in Trump's first term, where you had very conservative columnists who started out being very supportive, but then they didn't like what Trump was doing on their issues, so they started to attack Trump on every issue. And what happened? They became like, who is that person? And I think that's going to happen to people like Candace Owens and other people like that. So I think people are going to trust Trump, and the reality is Trump is not an isolationist.
Yeah,
he is not a restrainer. He believes in foreign policy to be based on what America's national interests are. And that's the metric by which you measure things. And he was very consistent in that the first term. He's already proved incredibly consistent in that in the second term. A lot of people came in and said Trump's going to, we don't like the endless wars. Ukrainians are all corrupt. We're going to walk away and leave them. Well, it's already 1,000, more than 2,050, 100%. That's not what Trump's going to do.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's stupid for the United States to walk away and hand the Russians a cheap win and say, "Oh, have a nice day. Don't hurt us anymore." I think in the Middle East we already know the root of a strong policy. One is a strong partnership with Israel. The other one is going to be hammering the Iranians back into the dirt in a very small box, and then really trying to get back to the Abraham Accords and give the Arabs and the Israelis the space and breadth to kind of do that. And I think that'll be a successful policy.
I'd like to kind of shift the conversation to more some national security issues. And I know Elon Musk has been very critical on the government for using outdated programming systems and things like that. He brought up COBOL, which I looked up, and apparently that programming language was created in 1959 and is still in use by the government. We also just saw that.
You know why I like that language? It's not older than I am.
That's true. We also saw that, just on December 31st, the U.S. Treasury said that it was hacked by China in a major incident. We see this happen more and more of these hacks. Are we really secure, and what do you think it will take to actually get us secure?
So, well, that's a great question. Because it's the wrong question. Everybody, it's like the kid in the back of the car. Are we there yet, Dad? When are we going to be safe? And the answer to that question is never, because it's a dynamic environment. Everybody knows, for example, you put an app on your computer and it gets hacked, and then you put a virus software on there, and then you're safer. So it's the ability to compete in the environment as opposed to give me a particular end state. So anybody, for example, has ever had their identity hacked and people trying to buy 87,000 credit cards in their name, and they say, I'll just do this, I'll block them. They can't get credit scores anymore and they're stopped, but then they figure out something else to do. So it's surviving in that competitive environment. What I actually love about Elon Musk's approach, and actually many of the conservatives, is that's the mindset that they come in with. They're not looking for this kind of, I'm going to do this Manhattan Project and all the problems are going to be solved. They're looking at changing your ability to compete over time. And the answer, is, how good do I, the one about the joke about two guys being chased by a bear? Yeah. Then the guy goes, I don't think we can outrun the bear. And the other guy goes, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you, right? Yep. And that's the thing is you just have to be able to outcompete your adversaries. And obviously, the problem that we've had, particularly with China in the last 20 years, is we've done the opposite. We go, well, we don't want to compete with the Chinese because then they might get mad at us and then they'll compete harder. I mean, that's like I'm running a marathon, and if I run too fast, right, the other guys might run off and leave me. Come on. So I think Musk has a great attitude. I think the combination of both his closeness and intimacy with the president and his large public voice is going to really enable him to be helpful, because his mindset in terms of tech competition is exactly in the right place. The other thing I would say, though, is, and a lot of people don't get this, is just because people are very influential with Donald Trump on some things doesn't mean they're very influential with Donald Trump on everything. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Trump likes for people to have different opinions. He likes to hear debate, actually. But Trump is a decider in chief. And so when it gets to the big issues of national security and print America first, the president's going to want to hear these views, but in the end, he will decide. So people said, Elon Musk said this. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be national policy. On some things, it might be. But on other things, Trump, I just tell people, Trump's two favorite senators were Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul. Well, I know you're laughing.
I am, because I can only imagine the disagreement.
The reason why you're laughing is, for people that don't follow the U.S. Senate, is there could not be more two different Republicans in the Republican Party than Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul. They agree on nothing. And Trump doesn't agree with them on everything, but he enjoyed both their company because he had honest, serious, deep exchanges, and he got useful input, right? But I think that is when people look at the cabinet, the mistake people make is they look at the cabinet appointments and they say, oh, this person tells us that this is going to be the policy, or that's going to be the policy. And what you actually see Trump doing in the cabinet is there's a deliberate intention. This goes back to the thing that we started talking about, is conservatism in the modern world is a whole set of problems that we want fixed with practical solutions. And what the president is trying to do in the cabinet is to bring in all the voices that help win him the election, and that need to feel like they are heard. And so it's not diverse like Biden diverse. Like Biden diverse was, I need a man, I need a woman, I need a woman that looks like a man, I need a man that looks like a woman, I need a black guy, I need an Asian guy, if I could find a gay Asian, transsexual, that would be even better, right? This is diversity in the sense of the diversity of the movement. But one of my frustrations with some of my fellow conservatives is the old conservative movement was this fusionist movement of, we had social conservatives and national security conservatives and economic conservatives, and we just all voted for the same people and went to different parties, and then that obviously was not sufficient to deal with the problems in the modern world. But I think the idea of, I will define the orthodoxy of conservatism, and then we'll all just do what I say, right? That's kind of the left's approach to dogma. Modern conservatism is not dogmatic in that sense. It is about addressing problems, and you have to listen to the diversity, because they all have interesting and important ideas. That's, people get angry that there are people that are isolationists, and I go, I don't care. I think that's great. We come into the room because it's through that conversation and dialogue that we can actually develop, well, what is just you being super opinionated, or you may be having a valid viewpoint. One of the things we've done a lot with is we have done a lot of bilateral meetings at Track 2, which is basically, not the government level, with Hungarians. And we've done several of these things. And on so many issues, American conservatives and Hungarians, we align perfectly. Not always on foreign policy. We think that their policies on China are bad. We think some of the stuff they do with the Russians, I understand why they do it, but it's not, it's not really going to take us anywhere. Yet we have the best conversations. I mean, I sat down with Viktor Orban and said, we don't like your policy on China. And Viktor was like, yeah, great. I mean, that's great.
Tell us what you don't like.
No. He said, yeah. He said, tell us what you don't like. And he goes, tell me, here's why I do that. And I said, okay, we agree to disagree. And I find that so I couldn't do that with Democrats, but I can do that with other conservatives. So that's, I think, the success of modern conservatism is stop thinking this is a definable orthodoxy. Whether you're a neocon or an isolationist or a free market guy or a national economic guy, just think of it as we all agree that we have to solve problems in a practical way, and have an honest debate about that and it'll work it out. So, and sometimes Trump does that for us, right? Yeah. So he could not get Lindsey Graham and Rand Paul to sit down in a room maybe and say, okay, here's what we want for foreign policy, but he can talk to both of them and just kind of synthesize that all himself.
Yeah, it's the best way to get the best ideas from both sides to make the most effective policy. That's why I like political disagreement when it comes down to this.
But see, this is the problem in modern politics because not that our government always ran well, but in the old days, really from the World War II through the end of the Cold War, our political parties were both politically and geographically fairly diverse. You had liberals and conservatives in both parties. You had hawks and doves in both parties. Yeah. You had people of different economic views in both parties, and they were dispersed around the country. And you could, when you said bipartisan, you actually could say, well, I can pull up enough people from both sides to get a consensus. And it wasn't that we always delivered perfect governance, but that's not the world that we live in today. Today we have two political parties that are not geographically and ideologically diverse. If anything, the modern Republican Party, whether Liz Cheney likes it or not, is a conservative party, period. The modern Democratic Party is a liberal, progressive party, period. And you can't achieve bipartisanship in the way we did in the old days. We're going to achieve it by the way we've done in this election is the people underneath us are going to tell us where the center of the country is. And the parties have to move there if they want to be able to govern.
Speaking about this national or global conservative movement shift to the right, how much of it do you think is just kind of counter-pushing or counter-pulling against what the left is doing? And how much do you think it's Trump making conservatives, I guess, cool and manly again?
Yeah, I absolutely think both of those are factors. Definitely there has been, and I think it really started with Obama, although they walked into it gradually. But definitely in COVID was the global moment really to push these policies. And so I think they saw that, and I think Trump scared them, right? So this was an opportunity, they had the controls of power to slam this down and own this forever. So a lot of it is conservatives reflectively responding to this, right? Parents never thought that they would have to go into a school board meeting and actually argue that it's not okay to have pornographic books in the library, or that it's okay for boys to pretend they're girls and go oogle girls in the girls' locker room. They just never thought that was going to happen. So part of it is a response, but part of it is leaders like Donald Trump showing that you can not only win with conservative ideas, but you can govern with conservative ideas. And this is what I tell people: is one is you have to be able to not just win but govern as a conservative. I think the most interesting case study in the world today is really Javier Milei in Argentina. Yeah. Here's a man with no majority in the parliament, with almost no political infrastructure behind him, who literally everybody wants. The Chinese want to take. The Chinese are running around and they're paying off everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a conservative or a liberal or whatever you are. The Chinese will pay you off if they can get access to you and help make Malay fail, because that's all they really want, right? Or buy them off, right?
And that's because they don't want that model to succeed
Exactly.
in Latin America. Where
Exactly. And so here's a guy with literally no infrastructure to govern, who has figured out how to govern and deliver unbelievable outcome, tremendous drop in the inflation rate, growing in the economy, recovering public safety. It's unbelievable. And what that happened is why can't you do that? That whatever your country is, why can they get that? This is there would not be a Pouillet in Canada without a Trump in the United States.
Yep.
But what's happening in Canada is people looking at their government saying, why can't you do that? Right? Why can't we do this in Canada? So I think this is a really incredible transformative moment of politics.
What's astounding to me is how quickly Milei has transformed Argentina. Being they had decades of just socialist policies destroying the government, and in just maybe I think it's like over a year now, they're negative, or they don't have any inflation now. Everything's changing. Like, I didn't think it'd be that easy. And is it really as good as what we're hearing?
Well, we used to have a saying in the Army, which is you always want to take over the worst company in the battalion, right? For the obvious reason that things can only get better, right? So, for one thing, Argentina was an incredibly, and still is in many ways, a very poorly run country. And so for a leader to come in and actually make the changes, it's not shocking that you immediately begin to see results. The other thing is basically Argentina's fundamentals are pretty good. I mean, that's a good sized population, good resources, reasonably good human capital. There's no reason why Argentina shouldn't be a successful country. I mean, if Milei was running Syria today, he might not be able to deliver the same results. But in a country like Argentina, but look, and this actually gets back to the kind of knee-jerk reaction, because, of course, when Milei ran, he was a fascist, or Maloney's a fascist, right? Mm-hmm. All these people are a threat to democracy. This has become a super serious problem because and it's one of the issues I've talked about, is it's political warfare of demonizing the opponents, right? And saying they're the threat to democracy. And in reality, what you're trying to do is just protect the status quo. I'll give you a good example, which is Albania. It's run by a guy named Rami, who's actually very popular. He's everybody's friend, right? Albania has had pretty solid GDP growth. Mm-hmm. That's impressive. In the last 4 years, they've lost about a third of their population. Wow. So how does that work out? How does that happen, right? How do you grow your economy and have all your people leave? Well, the answer is if you do enough money laundering, you can find.
I was just about to say, cook up the books, and you got it.
and then, of course, what they do is tell you the other thing, the interesting thing about Albania. Albania was the poster child for judicial reforms pushed by George Soros' Open Society Foundation, which had become the number one instrument in Albania to prosecute political enemies. Wow.
So that's what this eventual judicial reform that he wants to achieve here in the United States is in order to use it as a tool to persecute your political opposition.
Right, absolutely. Wow. And it's for the greater good. We destroy democracy in order to save it, right?
Under the guise of saving democracy,
right,
of course.
We have we empower the people by having a tyranny of the proletariat. So.
Jim, one last question before we wrap things up. Drones. It's been all over the news, maybe not as of late anymore, but what's going on with these drones that people were seeing over New Jersey? Do you have any insight? Is it the government, foreign adversary,
Yeah, well, the short answer is I don't know. And one of the hallmarks one of the principles I always try to live by, because you always get the 2:00 in the morning phone call. What about this? I go, well, until 14 seconds ago, I didn't know this was a thing. If I don't know, I tell people I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But here's what I will say. This goes back to the competitive issue. Drones are an inextricable part of our modern life. They're going to provide enormous opportunities and capabilities. Matter of fact, anybody that doesn't really embrace the potential of drones in the open commercial space and all the different things they can do is you're going to be a loser. Every time you do that, it creates adversarial opportunities, and it's like gun control. You don't ban guns, but you try to do reasonable things to, like, maybe have a guard outside the bank, right? So I think it's inexcusable in the last 4 years, particularly how we've seen drones used on the battlefield and weaponized, and how often, for example, we see tactics that are honed on the battlefield then poured over into terrorism. Yeah. So, like, car bombing is a good example. We're going to see terrorist attacks with drones in the United States.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, people paying attention to this, we already have. We've actually had people try this or talk about it. So they just weren't successful. But the reality is we're going to have, and it is something we can actually deal with. It's not an insolvable problem. We do this on the battlefield. We can do this in our public safety space, and we can expand the opportunities for this stuff to grow. But we have to take it seriously. But here, and again, this is not a political statement, but this goes back to my greatest criticism of the administration in the last 4 years. You cannot have good governance when your belief is that the purpose of government is to push a political agenda as opposed to delivering outcomes for your people. So when you say our top priorities are climate change and DEI and everything else, you're delivering outcomes which don't actually relate to people's lives. Mm-hmm. And people are not stupid. They see that. In a country where you don't have elections where people can react to that, which is the goal, right? The goal isn't, if you ever actually, Newsom just said this in California, right? He said, what was the one thing he asked for from the president? He said, stop the disinformation.
Oh,
right?
Yeah,
it wasn't like, put out the fires.
Right?
It wasn't, don't put out the fires. Don't give us water. Stop the disinformation, right? You want to, because once you've locked in the capacity to govern forever, then you're not held accountable anymore. Right?
Yeah. Screw the constituents. It's
right.
all about the
and that's
ideology.
What he loves doing. That's what Gavin Newsom loves doing, is pawning things off on anyone other than himself.
Be careful. You may not be able to enter California back after.
And the other thing is, look, I mean, going back to what George Kennan said is, you don't defeat the enemy by becoming the enemy. The challenge for Republicans is not to lock in control of governance like the Democrats could. The challenge for Republicans is to deliver on good governance. Yeah. Those are two very, very different things. Yeah. And here, what the Democrats what liberals will consistently attack Trump for the next 4 years is saying he is trying to be Hitler. He is trying to control the instruments of governance. There's a poster out in front of our building at Heritage. It says every judge that was elected in 2024 is one less judge that Trump can use to destroy our freedoms, right? This is just nonsense. But all the attacks in the next 4 years will be about he's taking our freedoms away, which are the reality is what he's going to try to do is deliver the people. But this is the real challenge. You have to deliver for the people. And you do have to do this with the mind is the notion is not Republicans get elected forever. The notion is you deliver for people and the people decide. And the reality is if you're delivering for people, you will keep getting. This is the front, Viktor Orban's, a lot of people demonize Hungary and everything else, but the reason why Viktor Orban gets elected time after time after time is because he actually does things Hungarians really like. There's the media in Hungary is actually there's more free media, there's more opposition being in Hungary than there ever was when Orban was out of office. But the criticism is the criticism is so out of touch with where the people of Hungary actually are. The guy's delivering for them, and they like that. And when he stops delivering for them, you know what? They'll vote him out.
Yeah, I think Trump has a very hard job in not only, as you were saying, actually governing for the people, but keeping together this massive mandate that he has with not only conservatives, but also disaffected voters on all sides of the other parties. And I think it's going to be a very hard thing to do without having the right fracture itself from infighting.
Well, that is always the challenge, and there's a difference between fracturing yourself from infighting and having that healthy that healthy debate and argument over what are the right policies. And so getting that right is the challenge. The other thing I would say is an advantage he has is everybody gets the joke. In 2016, when people said, well, Trump's going to, do whatever, people thought, oh my God, and some people still say that, but I think most Americans get the joke.
Yeah.
And when they know to look and see what he actually does and look at the outcomes and weigh it on that. And the last thing they're going to do is, well, look, the reason why you guys have a job, I don't know if this is job, I don't know if this is pay, don't tell me.
Well, TikTok exists now. Kidding.
Okay. Mainstream media has destroyed its own legitimacy in the way it has gone after the president and dealt with contemporary issues. That's created this enormous space for other people to come in. And it's created not new truth tellers, but the opportunity for people to walk into a supermarket of ideas and look for themselves. Oh, tomatoes look good today. Oh, carrots not so good, right? That's a much healthier, I think, environment than. And of course, what's frustrating about Elon Musk is not that he's destroying democracy or he's interfering in elections. Is people listen to him.
Yeah.
If they, if they didn't want to listen to him, they don't have to. But they're listening to him for a reason because it's an opinion that they value, and that's anybody who tells you that that's unacceptable. That's somebody who really doesn't.
That's
like
a
the
red
idea of
flag right
democracy.
there.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate it, Jim. Thank you so much for sitting down with us, especially at the beautiful Heritage Foundation studio. If you have any social media that you'd like to shout out, go ahead and plug it in.
Jeez. So I have an X account. It's JJ Carafano. I think I gave up all my other social media really because, I'm
Too big of a national security threat or too much of your time?
No, it's I actually think X is it's fine. It's some people like apple pie, right?
Yeah.
Like just bring me pie. I don't need to see the dessert list. Just bring me pie. I like pie. It works for me. It's good. X works for me. I think it's a tremendous. I actually agree with Elon Musk in that it is the world's best news source.
Yeah.
You get
absolutely
the fastest, most diverse news there, and you get leads to other stuff like podcasts and everything else. So I'm good. I'm really good with. That I would say I'm very eclectic. I mean, I don't have the biggest social following in the world, but it's pretty eclectic.
Well, we may make you viral.
Oh yeah,
we'll try.
Sure.
Thanks, Jim.
I think I'm too old to be viral.